Welcome to Friday Facts. We are thrilled. This has been months in the making. We're so excited to have Esther Greenhouse on our special Friday Facts program. It's taken a while to have her come with us, and it's just great. We're going to talk with her all about her work with Silver to Gold Strategic Consulting. A few quick announcements. Friday Facts, our next one will be October 13th, and we're thrilled to be interviewing Corey Hennessy of the LGBT Center of Raleigh. There we go, inviting some other people in. So make sure to participate in Friday Facts on October 13th. And then make sure on your calendars you have our Joining Our Voices virtual symposium November 13th through 17th, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that, but we're excited to have that. We're going to get started in just a moment, but I know we do have Virginia Slocum on with us, and it is her last day as our executive director, and we are just filled with gratitude for everything she has done for the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition, and she generally kicks us off with Friday Facts, so it is my first day in the pre-hosting and then the hosting position. So I don't want to take too much time away from Esther. So let me just say, Virginia, you are loved, and all that you have done for the coalition has been amazing. Now, let's get to our talk with Esther Greenhouse, because I know Esther and I know we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to read just a wonderful introduction. Wonderful about her, not because of what I'm sharing there. But Esther Greenhouse is the CEO of Silver to Gold Strategic Consulting. She's a built environment strategist and an industry scholar with the Cornell Institute for Healthy Futures. Esther is also an environmental gerontologist on a mission to end disabling and discriminatory housing and communities by creating places, policies, and initiatives for equitable and accessible housing, caregiving, and community development solutions that enable people to thrive across the lifespan and ability span. That's quite the introduction. Esther, you have a lot to describe for us all about what that means, but first I want to say welcome.
Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the work that each of you do at the coalition.
Thank you. All right, now we want to hear all about your work. We do have a tradition on Friday Facts. Before we dive into your work, we first want to understand a little bit more about you and where you're from and what experiences brought you into this world of environmental gerontology.
Great, thank you. So I'm a fairly recent transplant to the Triangle region. For over 30 years, I lived in Ithaca, New York. I had gone there to study as an undergraduate, ended up staying and kept going back to Cornell for additional degrees and or to teach and do research. And there are a variety of things that led me to this unique work and really what is my life's mission. There were a few things. So first of all, when I was a child, my maternal grandmother lived with us. And despite the fact that we lived in a ranch house without any steps, there weren't even steps to enter the house. When I was about 5, my grandmother had to move to a nursing home. And it was a combination of factors. She had rheumatoid arthritis, which was really changing her abilities. But some of the key moments were when we've discovered that with her walker, she couldn't get through the bathroom door because the door was too narrow. And once in the bathroom, if she got in with assistance, she wasn't able to take care of herself, to toilet or bathe independently. And caregiving, of course, was also an issue because my mother had 2 children, approximately 5 and 11. And so my grandmother moved to a facility. And it was a pretty well-run facility, and she received good care. But visiting her weekly from approximately age 5 till she passed away at age 13 I was really sensitive to the change in her life. And I was sensitive to things in the environment, which brings me to another variable. I have a few invisible disabilities. I have something called sensory processing disorder, which can manifest in different ways. In my case, I'm unusually sensitive to sensory input. So light, sound, motion. And I also have some visual processing disorders. So my whole life, I was very attuned to the relationship between a person and their environment. And when I was an undergraduate at Cornell studying design and environmental analysis, I remember we were in one of our environmental psychology classes, we were looking at how different populations are impacted by different types of environments. And when we started to read about older adults in urban settings and when they're out in the community, what barriers and features could negatively impact their lives, like crumbling sidewalks, lack of lighting at night, lack of benches, then it was just like the heavens parted and this divine light shone down and said, this is what you will specialize in. And fortuitously, a couple of weeks later, Cornell introduced a gerontology program and I ran to sign up. And so my undergraduate work was in interior design, design environmental analysis, gerontology, and later degrees were in environmental psychology research and city and regional planning.
Okay, well, that's a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing about your own experiences with your grandmother, your own experiences with how you experience the world and how that really drove you to your empathetic and more observational abilities on what's happening with other folks. So I know I'm not the only one to ask you, and I've interviewed you in other places before, and I know you get the question all the time. So you went and you focused on gerontology. But even the first time I met you, what is an environmental gerontologist? How do you describe that?
So an environmental gerontologist is somebody who focuses on the relationship between environments, particularly built environments, and older adults. And in my case, my mission is to leverage the features of the built environment to enable people to maintain their physical and financial independence as they age.
Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. And I was sort of embarrassed. I've been in the aging space for a long time, and it wasn't until literally it's a cocktail party conversation because you and I met at a professional cocktail party, if you will. And I
Yeah.
said, and it makes so much sense. I mean, I love that connection. And so when you go and you talk with folks about what environmental gerontology is, and specifically your expertise, what do you really ask people to pay more attention to? And I do know that's a little bit of a segue because I know, well, a lead up question, not a segue. I know from our past discussion, you often talk about three pillars of focus when you talk about environmental gerontology in your work. So feel free, because I remember when you taught that to me, I was like, oh, that's a good thought. All right. So tell us about your focus area and what you want people to pay more attention to and how you build it with your pillars. That's a great, a pun intended.
Right. That's right. The pillars that are the foundation of the work. So years ago, I was doing a lot of work around the country. I was teaching nationally for the National Association of Home Builders, teaching their certified aging in place specialist course. I was doing a lot of speaking at conferences and events, and the response I often got to my work and my mission was positive, but So, for example, builders, developers, municipal leaders would say, well, it would be great to be inclusive of the needs of older adults and of persons with disabilities, but we can't design for a subset of the population. And I said, that's great. Then you'll join me on this mission because that's exactly what we do. And that is when I developed something called the enabling design approach. And the enabling design approach has 3 pillars. There's a very nice graphic on my website. If you go to silvertogoldstrategies.com, in the top menu, there is a page for enabling design. And the 3 pillars are as follows. The first is optimal person-environment fit. And this comes from the world of environmental psychology, primarily the work of M. Powell Lawton. And his environmental docility hypothesis, distilled to its essence, is very simple and very powerful. And that is when there's good fit between a person and their environment, they can function at their highest level. Now, I primarily, but not exclusively, focus on the built environment because, for example, with care, there's also the protocol of care. For example, in a workplace, there's also the policies and procedures. And the problem is that the greater the gap between what my abilities are and what the built environment or the policy or programmatic environment ask of me, the more I am subjected to a form of stress called environmental press. And environmental press actually pushes the person to an artificially lower level of functioning that is preventable by design and policies and programs that actually meet their need. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is what I referenced before about not designing for the subset of the population. Because what very few people know, even most designers, architects, builders, developers, is that the status quo of how we design and build based on our codes, on our conventions, result in environments and products and services and policies that really are ideal for a subset, but particularly with design, places and products, we create places and products that are ideal for the average height male, so that's about 5'9" in the US, and for people with high physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities. And everyone else has to adapt. So when you think about that in relation to what I just described about person-environment fit, you realize that we're creating places that are making people struggle unnecessarily. And the third pillar is taking into consideration the first 2 pillars in addition to services, policies, and very importantly, economics, and saying, okay, what things are contributing to making environments that people are struggling against? And what can we do to make shifts that actually enable people to thrive intentionally?
And that is so, I love the pillars. I love how you talk about it. It's funny, I don't even want to ask questions. I'm just sitting here just taking it in as a wonderful lecture because the way that you help to describe, and it is such an aha moment. We don't want to build for a subset. Well, you're already doing that, building for the subset. And then what happens to the rest of us?
Yes.
So glad that you started and talked about your work with the National Association of Home Builders. You are a certified aging in place specialist, a CAP certified, that kind of fun term, and you also have been an educator clearly to teach others. And so a question I know that I've asked you before in other settings, when you do your work and you're trying to help people realize the more equitable way to build, do you find that you're working more with individuals and how they're creating their own aging in place homes? Or
Mhm.
is your work more with communities and businesses, how they're creating more equitable, more public or workspaces? How do you divide where you put your expertise?
Right. So the vast majority of my work is on a larger scale. I work consulting for municipalities, for businesses, for not-for-profit organizations. And mostly that is because I feel this incredible urgency to try to change things on a large scale. So some of the projects that I've worked on and clients are, for example, I've worked for counties that have been struggling with the intersection of a growing older adult population in conjunction with lack of affordable housing, um, lack of employment, and other financial pressures. I consulted for AARP International for 2.5 years. I co-developed an initiative called Equity by Design. And I can share that resource. You can put it up on your page along with this recording. And the two pillars of Equity by Design are equity and my enabling design approach. And that's a great resource. I encourage people to check it out because there are webinars webinars and issue briefs with models that people can be inspired by and replicate. The enabling design approach was also applied to the design of the nation's first elder-focused emergency department. Dr. Bill Thomas, who many of you know, brought me in to work on that. And but I'm increasingly exploring ways to work directly with individuals who are looking at these issues. I'm increasingly being requested, and I've begun to do some strategy work with people. And some of this is also informed by my personal experiences. So about 15 years ago, my husband, who was a custom home builder, and I designed a home for my mother. We built it next door to our home, and it was intentionally designed to enable her to maintain her physical and financial independence for as long as possible. And that house and her situation is my best case study. Through the choices we made, and nothing was radical, but things like wider doorways, a 0-step entry, no grade changes, thoughtful lighting, we enabled my mother to delay moving to a facility by 5 to 7 years. So that saved the family potentially over $500,000. And I'm not sure what it would have saved the government if she had been on Medicaid. So that's something that I want to point out, and that relates to the importance of the third pillar, is that we are in a situation in our country where on every level, the individual level, the family level, community, state, federal, organizational, corporational, we cannot afford the long-term care and caregiving situation we're in now, and that is growing. We're in a period where demographically we're shifting from in 2010, approximately potentially 7 caregivers for every 1 older adult. We're down to about 1 to 5 now. And in about 10 to 15 years, we're going to have less than 3 potential caregivers for every older adult. Long-term care costs are increasing and personal financial resources are decreasing. So how do we balance the equation? We balance the equation by the design of the built environment. We create home environments and we create senior housing and facilities that intentionally enable people to be as independent as they possibly can and to maintain and retain that independence. And it can reduce caregiving demands. I saw it with my mother.
Well, you can, I know what, keep going. I know what you're going to share with that. And actually, it's a good thing to share. Go forth about, the caregiving demands. Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know if that's what you.
No, but you mean personally with my mother, my experience? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know if you were going to, well,
No,
we
but
have,
for
yeah.
10 years, I was my mother's primary caregiver. And looking back, I think that there needs to be a lot more support for caregivers. I was definitely the lead on her medical care, and her doctors were phenomenal, but not one of them ever asked me, how are you doing? How are you managing? Even when there were times where I broke down crying during a doctor's visit. The other thing that is a huge aspect of all of this is what kind of support are we giving to people who are receiving care and experiencing these significant changes in their lives? It must be incredibly difficult to be told you can no longer drive. It must be incredibly difficult to be told you need to move out of your home and into a facility, or we need to have somebody to come in to help you take care of yourself. So I think there needs to be a lot more counseling and support for everyone in the equation. And I encourage people on the caregiving journey to sit down and make a plan, just a few bullet points of what are key things that they will and will not do. Same thing for the person who's receiving care. And in your calendar, set a reminder that once a quarter, you're going to reevaluate and say what's working and what isn't, because unfortunately, we tend not to reevaluate unless there's a crisis.
Yeah, exactly. I can't thank you enough for going into, you knew what my next question was, even though you didn't know what my next question was, because I was going to ask you to weave your work into the caregiving journey that many of us are on and that you've experienced. And and the issue around caregiving and patient engagement is such a critical pillar of the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition. So I'm so glad that you put that in. And I have a question about our opportunities, but I see that there's a question in the chat line from our wonderful colleague, Charlotte Sweeney, wondering if you've worked with the Veterans Administration and its caregiver support program.
I have not, but thank you for asking that question.
Good to know. There's a program you've been involved with so many programs. I have the AARP, the Clinton, the Cornell. Yeah.
So I have not. And Charlotte, if you want to email me and we can discuss more about that, I would love to have a conversation. The way you can reach out to me is if you go to silvertogold.com, silvertogoldstrategies.com, excuse me. There's a contact form. And if you fill that out, I'll have your email and I can reach out to you. But one thing I want to bring up relating to the VA is that every group that I've worked with has has not been aware of or taking advantage of the home modification grants for veterans. Now, for veterans who have been injured and have developed disabilities in the line of service, there is a once in a lifetime grant, which I think is over $70,000 now. But if you're a veteran who has changes in their abilities, but did not attain those in service, there are grants for a couple of $1,000s. And that can be a valuable resource in terms of building in a 0-step entry or modifying a bathroom. So I encourage people to look at that on the individual level. Anybody who's working directly with people who need support, ask if they've been a veteran. But at the same time, on a community level, it can be tens of thousands of dollars of untapped resources for the veterans, the aging veterans in your community.
Thank you. That's an amazing resource, and I know both of you and can connect you both also offline. I know we just have a few minutes left, and given your amazing breadth of focus area, and I know that there's so many ways we really want to dive into how we can create more enabling and equitable environments. What are some ways that we can partner together, or that the Serious Illness Coalition, how can we help to promote your efforts? Clearly, we want to give you a stage in any way we can, and so I'm so glad you're on Friday Facts. But we have a whole connection with caregivers. We have a connection with our clinicians. What are some ways, or let's think about some ways we can work together and ways to help promote your opportunities there for both of us?
That would be terrific. That would be terrific. The biggest thing is the number one thing I need to do is to create a paradigm shift. And when I'm given 5 to 10 minutes to talk about my enabling design approach and these issues, I can look in people's eyes and know that that paradigm shift has occurred, and they will never see the built environment in the same way again. So that's the number one. So we can certainly talk about additional opportunities for me to come in and communicate, talk about these issues and resources. And in addition, Heather, we can look at my sharing some articles that I've written. For example, the Certified Senior Advisors Journal asked me to write an article about this whole concept that an initiative I'm developing, which is, as I've mentioned before, is using the built environment as a key strategy in retirement. So that you are intentionally leveraging the features of your home to enable you to maintain your physical and financial independence, which is complementary to the Caregiving by Design initiative that I'm also developing. So there's a bunch of resources that I can share. And I think some of when you talk about with clinicians, clinicians and anyone who is advising individuals, any type of organization, we need to understand that this is another tool that you have. And I'm not talking about just putting in grab bars and putting in a temporary metal ramp. I'm talking about the full spectrum. So people being much more intentional. If they're in their 50s and 60s, for example, or especially if they have been diagnosed with a progressive serious illness, that they look at that home environment and with the help of professionals and say, what features can I change that will support me, that will enable me to function independently, that won't be a negative variable that actually exacerbates any kind of decline or loss in abilities that may be expected.
That is wonderful advice. And I'm not sure if you were able to see into all of our eyes, but I know just in our few minutes together, you have, and every time I talk with you, I learn so much. I'm sure our listeners have, and it is so true. I've seen it with colleagues, I've seen it with students, and I know about it with myself. Whenever you're taught to open your eyes and see things, you you never don't see it. We'll end with a double negative. You always see it. You see, wait a second, the lighting's off here, or wow, that curb isn't going to work for me to get in, or oh, how is someone going to get through that doorway, or how am I going to get downstairs if that's where the bathroom is? So once we learn it and then we start going that out, well, what does that mean for our buildings? What does that mean for our communities? And so thank you for opening up our eyes on a Friday morning with Friday Facts. I cannot thank you enough. Esther Greenhouse. We'll have lots of your information on our website. Thank you to the members of the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition for joining us, and a heartfelt thank you to Virginia Slocum, and hopefully she will continue to join us on Friday Facts, and hopefully will be an upcoming guest soon. And really, everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful Friday.